The other side of that is, no, people want easy answers. And that's what religion is. It's an easy answer. And so why can't you give that to them to free them from the anxiety that the modern world has produced in all its complexity and all its amorality, and give them an easy answer so they can fight back against those complex people that are always making things harder than they need be, and talking about all this abstraction. And then you go back to his Seven Storey Mountain, and there's so much there that he didn't know he knew. That was already in the opening paragraph of the Seven Storey Mountain. And it seems almost, divinely sent, or like, automatic writing in a weird way, that he was telling us who he was before he even knew it himself.
Welcome to the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast. I'm your host, Travis Mullen, and I'm excited to have you with us. This is a podcast about philosophy and meaning. It is about how we as humans withstand the challenges of our cultures. It is about the general Judeo-Christian revelation of God in the world and how the bloodiest century ever recorded couldn't kill that revelation. It's also about how that revelation, tossed aside as archaic, outdated, and obsolete, may be the very life-giving power we need to resist this distracted techno state we're living in, full of anxiety, depression, and teenage suicide.
It's great entertainment, thrilling entertainment. It's the inside story packed with drama.
Thomas Merton was born in 1915 in Prague, France, to two American artists, Owen and Ruth Merton. His childhood was shaped by a movement across Europe and America, artistic influences, and profound loss. His mother died of cancer when he was 6 years old, and his father, a painter who continued traveling with Thomas through France, England, and the United States, died when Thomas was just 15. Those early experiences of instability, loneliness, and searching would become recurring themes throughout his writing. As a young man, Merton attended schools in England before enrolling at Columbia University in New York, where he immersed himself in literature, philosophy, politics, and jazz, and the bohemian culture of the city. He possessed a brilliant intellect, but admitted that his life lacked direction. He pursued pleasure, struggled morally, and wrestled with questions of meaning, questions of identity and purpose. And during those years, he encountered Christian thinkers whose writing slowly began reshaping his imagination. In 1938, Merton was received into the Roman Catholic Church, a decision that redirected the course of his life. 3 years later, after discerning various paths, he entered the Abbey of Gethsemane near Bardstown, Kentucky, becoming a Trappist monk devoted to prayer, silence, manual labor, and the rhythms of monastic life. He expected to disappear into obscurity, but the opposite happened. In 1948, Merton published The Seven Storey Mountain, an autobiography that became an unexpected publishing phenomenon. The book sold hundreds of thousands of copies, inspired countless religious vocations, and established Merton as one of the best-known Christian writers in America. The success also created a lifelong tension. He desired a hidden contemplative life, and readers around the world looked to him as a spiritual guide. Over the next 2 decades, Merton became remarkably prolific, writing more than 70 books along with hundreds of essays, journals, poems, letters, and book reviews. His interests continued to widen. He explored contemplative prayer, the Desert Fathers, literature, art, psychology, racial injustice, nuclear weapons, war, and the moral challenges of modern technological society. His correspondence connected him with figures ranging from writers and theologians to civil rights leaders and peace activists. And during the final years of his life, he also developed a deep interest in Buddhist thought and other religious traditions. believing that serious dialogue could deepen understanding without diminishing Christian convictions. Merton's life was not without struggle. He wrestled with fame, institutional expectations. He wrestled with personal ambition and periods of interior conflict. In 1966, while recovering from surgery, he formed a romantic relationship with a young nurse, an episode he later described with honesty in his journals. Rather than diminishing his humanity, the experience revealed the complexity of a man who never presented himself as spiritually complete. In 1968, after receiving permission to travel to Asia, Merton met with Buddhist monks and scholars, including the Dalai Lama, in conversations that reflected his lifelong desire to learn from other traditions while remaining grounded in his own. On December 10, 1968, after delivering a talk at an interfaith conference in Bangkok, Thailand, Merton died in an accidental electrocution at the age of 53. Merton's enduring contribution lies in the way he spoke to the interior life. He gave language to the human search for identity and described the difference between the false self, which is shaped by ego, and social expectations, and the true self discovered in the presence of God. He argued that silence, contemplation, and sustained attention are essential practices for becoming fully human. His work continues to speak to readers over the world who feel overwhelmed by distraction and restless, constant activity, or hunger for the deeper life rooted in truth, in humility, and communion with God. Welcome back to the podcast, Professor.
Thank you, Travis. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I read Seven Storey Mountain when I was 20 years old, and I've reread it 50 years later. So for me, two different people read that novel. The young guy who was blown away by Merton's literary ambitions and his search for his true self. And then the old guy looking back on his career as a writer and his letters and his journals and his reassessments and self reassessments, and with a kind of sympathy and awareness of what it means to look at yourself again from the standpoint of 30 or 40 years. I look at Seven Storey Mountain now as the masterpiece that it truly is. I think there was a time when I preferred his essays. All those essays, like the ones on contemplation, the ones on solitude, the one on No Man is an Island, were written while when he was scholastic to the to the novices at the monastery, and so they were my favorite for a good 20 years after I read Seven Storey Mountain, because they speak directly to a Christian novice coming into the maturity of his faith. But looking back now to me, those seem to have culminated pretty early in his career, right around the time of his death, when he was getting ready to pursue a deeper understanding of contemplation. And then you go back to his Seven Storey Mountain, and there's so much there that he didn't know he knew. That was already in the opening paragraph of the Seven Storey Mountain. And it seems almost, divinely sent, or like, automatic writing in a weird way, that he was telling us who he was before he even knew it himself. And then you're reading that when you're 20 years old, and it seems it's too close to a person trying to grow out of their trauma, who from a guy who's still in the middle of it, who is
Yeah.
and it's not that he's in the middle of it, because the point of view of Seven Storey Mountain is of a guy who just came out the other side, who just joined the Trappist, who's sort of been in the Trappist 8 years or something. And so he's sort of like not that person. But the story he tells, he looks back on and he says, that's not who I am now. That's who I was back then. But I think he knew more about who he was back then from an enlightened point of view than he admits to himself. And so when it came out, everybody sort of praised it as, a defense of the church, or, an apologetic for the church. And he felt embarrassed by that assessment, because he knew the struggle behind it, and he knew the open door he had walked through on the other side. He didn't become a proselytizer for the Catholic Church. He became a survivor of his own spiritual search that passed through the doors of contemplative Christianity. That was the story, but people were reading the Seven Storey Mountain, to meet their own needs for a secure faith, answers to religious questions. And for him, the questions were just beginning to open up. And then 20 years later, he's dead. All those letters, all those journals get published eventually. And now you have the whole story, or maybe the whole story of a lifetime of searching. And that makes it even more interesting when you go back and then you read, where he was when he was looking for himself, and then where he was when he was in charge of the novices, and where he was when he took that journey to the East and ended up dead in a bathroom. It's this stuff, it's an epic spiritual life that will someday be a movie, for better or for worse.
My question is and also it relates to what you just said about the 50-year gap from reading it at 20 and then reading it at 70. You told me on an initial early call that Merton had a big effect on you in your own faith journey. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I actually don't remember if you said it was Seven Storey Mountain or something else, and just what that was and how it affected you is what I wanted to ask you.
Merton is not a spiritual writer with a lot of answers. He's a spiritual writer with a lot of questions and a lot of disillusionments as to cheap grace and easy faith. And his faith was hard won. And it was preceded by a deep dive into literary modernism and the most challenging writers of the 20th century, and his initiation into the creative life with a group of like-minded friends who found and he, first among equals, found his way to the Catholic Church before any of the other ones.
You mean a group he was running with or something?
Yeah, he was at Columbia. He had 5 to 6 really close friends, and they used to spend their summers in Robert Lax's house, who's one of the premier poets of the 20th century. But nobody knew that at the time, just as no one knew that Thomas Merton would be the premier spiritual writer of the 20th century. And they wrote novels together and in their bunkhouse, and hung out at the beach and wrote poetry. And Ad Reinhardt, who was one of their friends, painted abstract expressionist paintings. And it was a kind of their attempt to make good on their life at Columbia, which, as Merton said, promised to make him a success, but paradoxically cured him of the desire of ever wanting to be one. And so that time resulted in him becoming a Trappist monk, despite all indications to the contrary, and exploration of different faiths and discovery of Thomism and contemplative Christianity. And, you know, he wasn't converted by a pamphlet in Times Square. Not that being converted by a pamphlet in Times Square can't be authentic, but it just isn't the same thing as taking on the hipsters of your era and the cynics and atheistic modernist writers that you idolized in the smithy of your own soul and coming out otherwise. That was an achievement. But then when he became celebrated as a ticket to heaven, he didn't like it. It struck him as, you know, a bit cheap that they were praising him for when he criticized other faiths or when he looked down on Buddhism. And he didn't like those passages in the Seven Storey Mountain. He thought that they were, you know, evidence of his own, you know, the energy of a recent convert, and not a mature Christian who has had his life deepened and his conscience tendered. And so he was a bit embarrassed by those passages, precisely because so many people, you know, would put them on their refrigerator. And so he quickly, you know, put out his journals of those first 2 years to let people know, you know, that it wasn't the easy, that he wasn't encouraging religious pride or chauvinism at all, and that if anything, or, you know, Catholicism or Christianity is a ticket to success. If anything, he was skeptical of those values.
So I asked you about your experience with Merton.
Oh, my experience of him. Yeah. So my experience of him was that's the guy that modeled, if I converted, it would be a Merton conversion.
So, like, how old were you?
20.
What was your philosophy before that?
Oh, my philosophy was that the Christians were the people with the Three Spiritual Laws book, and everybody else was atheists, and I was lost in between. And I couldn't be either one. And then you get this guy who says, I couldn't be either one either. And this is why. And it wasn't because I was more sophisticated than the Three Spiritual Law people. I was just not convinced. It seemed that they were overlooking so much important information about history and change and society and World War I and the atomic bombs. And I couldn't rationalize a Christianity that wasn't contemplative and didn't face the obvious amorality of the world. And it seemed like Merton was up for that. And then you read, you know, and then I read Seven Storey Mountain, and like when I read the Brothers Karamazov, which was probably more important than my own conversion to Christianity.
When did you read that compared to when you read Merton?
I read that before Merton, actually, when I was 19. So Merton didn't seem as theologically heavy as Dostoevsky, but he seemed more available to me as an honest modern person.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of like, well, why aren't you citing the Brothers Karamazov more?
Yeah.
There are sources. There are other sources too, other than your Jesuit instructor in night school. So it was more like he was a friend of mine. I understood, what he was feeling when he was having these inner experiences, but not knowing quite how to explain them to his friends or to other people. So he kept a journal, and now we have access to it. And now
but your experience of him that had a conversion effect on you was Seven Storey Mountain, right? Or did you end up jumping into a bunch of his stuff right after?
Well, I don't think he was as essential in my conversion to Christianity than Dostoevsky. I think he was more instrumental in making Catholicism less onerous than my parents had painted it to me. My father had been a cradle Catholic, and my mother had been a Protestant anti-Catholic who had filled my youth with stories of the Pope trying to take over the United States and things like that. So I didn't really. I mean, I thought of Catholicism as kind of an exotic idea. And not something that ordinary people took very seriously until I read Seven Storey Mountain, and I realized that I had been sold a bill of goods, and that there was much more here than met the eye, and that it deserved my attention. And so I knew I had to read everything he wrote. But see, I read Seven Storey Mountain after he'd already died. So he was a somebody who was speaking from the dead, from the grave. So when I read that he had, in Sign of Jonah, that he denounced that book a year later as being the confession of a overly enthusiastic convert, that Merton really attracted me even more. But as I got older, the Merton of the Seven Storey Mountain seems to me better than I ever had imagined as a young person, because I'm not worried about, being sold a bill of goods or falling prey to, a pamphlet by an anti-Catholic, anti-Semite extremist. Because I've been around the block and I've been up and back on the Merton story, and I just can't believe when I read it again how much he felt his way into his own future.
When you were reading him at 19, were you, or was it 20?
20, yeah.
Were you spiritually seeking? Is that why you were reading him, or were you reading him for a literary reason at the time?
That's a good question.
Like, why were you reading him?
I was reading him because he explained my experience of faith to me.
No, but how did you know that was going to happen? Like,
well,
did somebody tell you should read it?
It had already happened with the Brothers Karamazov. I knew I was a Christian. I knew I was a believer, but I didn't know if I had a tribe to hang with, I didn't know who my people were, be another way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
I was tempted to by the progressive Catholics, people like Berrigan and Dorothy Day and that ilk. But Merton spoke to me more directly because it was more of a one-on-one. He wrote very, you read his prose, and it's very personal and it's very honest.
Like you felt he had read your mail.
Like he'd read your mail and you're reading his.
Yeah.
And he's not going to be a spokesman for an institution at the expense of telling you the truth of his own experience.
You felt the raw, authentic self, and not him trying to propagate something.
Yeah. There was not a little quote at the end of the letters, saying, if you would like further information about the Catholic Church, you can contact Bishop Barron at this address. It wasn't that kind of a testimony, a kind of hired hand or a public spokesman or spokesperson.
More just who he was and how he was in the world.
And if he lost his faith, he'd tell you about it. And if he thought that first book was a little bit clawing and fawning, he'd tell you about it. So that had happened before I read Seven Storey Mountain.
What had happened?
So then when I got to the end, I immediately asked, well, what happened to this guy? And then my friend told me, well, read Sign of Jonah. That's the 2 years he was in the monastery. And that's the sequel that tells you this is what the struggle was rather than the end of the story. So a few years later, decided that I was going to take classes to become a Catholic. At that time, it was called the RCIA. And so I signed up for, 12 classes and went to them with two of my friends who were also considering becoming Catholics. And one of them was a Vietnam vet who had suffered suffered from PTSD, but not severely. He had, he had volunteered for Vietnam, and I think spent 3 years in Vietnam, and so he was instrumental in many ways. He would give me books by Merton, and I don't think he gave me Seven Storey Mountain, but he gave me Sign of Jonah, and he gave me the letters, which were some of the letters which were already some of them are coming out, the excerpts from them and the journals and things. And so we go to these catechism classes, and my brother-in-law went with me. And so we would go to these catechism classes, and the priest would give us the answers. And then we'd go to Denny's and drink bottomless cups of coffee with my Vietnam vet friend, and he'd give us the questions.
That's cool.
And so it was, okay, now you heard the answers.
Were you guys smoking cigarettes too? It's like 1978. It's 1978. You're drinking coffee in Denny's late at night.
He would tell these stories about, how he escaped having to go out on patrol by volunteering for seemingly more dangerous missions that really were not dangerous at all. And once he learned that the guys who were were bragging about being these headhunters, honcho headhunters, were really just going around in a circle around the camp zone and smoking dope and listening to rock and roll on their headsets in hidden parts of the country. Or, but then also, more heartfelt things about tragedies and difficulties he had. And it was quite an education to hear that side of Vietnam and him reading from Merton at the same time, after having a somewhat disappointing explanation of, let's say, the rosary or miracles. That's why I always think of Merton as part of my conversion to Catholicism, but the heavy lifting being done by my friend Gary and his and my literary teachers who taught me Dostoevsky and the Christian side of the Russian realists and dissident writers, and not just not fairy tales, but let's just say parables of magical parables about the faith. That was the subversive orthodoxy for me.
Mm-hmm.
And Christianity is subversive, if nothing at all. Who was it? I think McLuhan said, they asked him about his conversion to Catholicism, and he said, I entered like everybody else entered the church, on my knees.
Mm.
And I thought, he understands subversive orthodoxy. He understands the faith of a PTSD Vietnam survivor that doesn't want to hear about these easy truths. He wants to know, what about the fact that I prayed, or so-and-so prayed, and he was dead the next day? What's that? How do you explain that?
Yeah.
And
he wanted to know, like, are you actually listening? Are you actually paying attention? Are you actually living in the tension that this world is?
Exactly.
Or are you pretending like it's not because you got some religious bow?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like sort of like, are you doing that? Is this faith helping you do the heavy lifting, or is it an excuse not to look at the truth?
Yeah, is it like I think a great modern metaphor is like Disneyland.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of Christians think, I think a lot of Christians think, is my opinion, think the good news of Jesus is supposed to make life like Disneyland, and now there shouldn't be no problems, and all the bad things are just because evil people are doing them.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take into account 1,000 other things, like you said, like if the guy just prayed and then he's dead the next day, or an example I have is a pastor who's praying for his daughter with leukemia and she dies at age 8,
Yeah.
in front of the whole congregation, like not in front of the whole congregation, but his whole congregation knew the whole struggle for years, and then she dies. Like, what's that, and many other things. So yeah, I I hear your gut feeling from Merton was like, okay, here's somebody that actually deals with reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a thoughtful way that's not using religion to veneer or code over life in a Disneyland kind of way.
Well,
or pushing it all off to the afterlife, the other tendency.
Yeah, and Dostoevsky, I mean, and the literature and the guys that we've been talking about, the Christians we've been talking about, the writers like McLuhan and Wendell and who have a literary sensibility, know that literature requires you, and Flannery O'Connor, not to duck the difficult questions, because there are people that have been through a lot more that want more from you than cliches and easy answers. Now, of course, the other side of that is, no, people want easy answers. And that's what religion is. It's an easy answer. And so why can't you give that to them to free them from the anxiety that the modern world has produced in all its complexity and all its amorality, and give them an easy answer so they can fight back against those complex people that are always making things harder than they need be, and talking about all this abstraction. Well, these abstraction and these tragedies weren't made up by those people. The tragedies came to them. Tragedy came to Flannery O'Connor. Tragedy came to Thomas Merton. He didn't go looking for it. He didn't go looking to be a sad Gus, or a fancy man. He was looking for truth, and truth took him to Christ. And Christ, the truth of Christ, is not what the atheists tell you it is, or the modernists tell you it is. And once you see through that, you're on the other side of the argument, and you don't need fake answers anymore. And that's what Merton provided, to his novices. It was like, you don't have to flinch from the truth. You've got all the ammunition you need to transcend the lie of this world. And here it is. And so, that's why Merton will forever be my brother in arms. It was, I'll tell you this story because this is, I think, fits in this. My friend Gary died a few years ago from a very strange illness that was something akin to Legionnaire's disease, where his brain was being devoured from the inside out by a kind of virus. And so he died fairly quickly. It was not an easy death, but it wasn't long, prolonged pain. And so I was one of a couple of people that spoke at his funeral.
Was he the Vietnam vet friend?
Yeah, he's a Vietnam.
I thought so, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, so he's a Vietnam vet. I was the second person to talk, and the priest spoke first, and he said, well, Gary was a good friend of mine, and he always used to come to my office and ask me these questions about the faith. And he'd always bring in a book, and it would be somebody, like Bonhoeffer or Thomas Merton, or, sometimes even Aquinas or Augustine. And he'd ask me these questions. And I said to him, and I'd say, Gary, you spend too much time in your books. Faith isn't that hard. You want things to make more sense than they do. Lighten up. Have a hamburger. Come to the church social. And by the way, I like the work you're doing with Vincent de Paul. Keep up the good work. Just make sure you pass out those pamphlets. That's the, and I was just incensed. I'm sitting there listening to this, and he's talking about a guy, who. Okay, we'll have to stop here for a second.
No problem.
A guy who fought a hot war for this, to save this guy's ass. And he's daring to talk down to him as a superior spokesman for Jesus Christ. Give me a freaking break.
Yeah.
So when I got up there, I broke down like that.
Oh, so he went before you?
He went before me. And I got down, and when I got up there, I said, if there are any young people in the audience, don't let this man tell you not to read books. Don't let this man tell you that Gary didn't read books and he didn't like them and it didn't deepen his faith and it didn't make him more of a Christian. Don't think those things. Faith doesn't come necessarily from simplicity. It comes from truth and understanding. And Gary was brave. He was not easily persuaded by happy talk.
Mm.
And I'm glad I said it. The friend of my son, my brother-in-law, who had gone with us to the nighttime, adult catechism classes, gave me, a high five. But other than that, I felt like I had just, been the fart in the room, the turd in the punch bowl, as they say.
Yeah.
It was, but I felt I had to be his witness, and I thought that his widow was going to give me one of his books, but she never did because she'd already gave him away to Goodwill. And
You mean his own books, or what do you mean?
Well, he had a whole library, and C.S. Lewis and all of these people that we talk about.
No, she gave it to Goodwill.
He gave it all to Goodwill. As far as I know, because they weren't there when I came to collect I wanted, to get one of those books he was reading in the last days of his life, and they weren't there anymore.
Mm.
But, it was, not that important for me, but I think of that like, with Merton, Merton's books, he hadn't finished writing he hadn't finished publishing 2/3 of the books he wrote when he died. And then the books that came out were edited by other people. And his reputation rose and fell on whatever was the current theological controversy of the day. But I always felt that had you just read Seven Storey Mountain, you would have been kind of immune to those kinds of struggles over his reputation, or wondering, whether he was a certified Catholic or a renegade priest. I think it's obvious. He was a certified Catholic. He was no renegade priest.
Do you think it's similar to Dorothy Day or more extreme as far as how the Catholic Church views them too?
Oh, Dorothy Day might be the blocking back to his fullback across the
trying to get through the line.
Because her politics is the heavy lifting. She's the one who said, I'm taking no prisoners. My God wouldn't accept a Cold War victory on the back of the death of a civilization. That's not my faith. It doesn't say line up in your fallout shelter while you drop atomic bombs on your enemies. That's not Christian love to me. And the apocalypse is not going to look like that, except in the imagination of some pretty desperate folk. And Merton sort of agreed, but he wasn't. I don't know. He wasn't in some ways as politically gutsy as Dorothy Day. He didn't. When we were talking about Dorothy Day's journals were even more explicit than Merton's. I mean, he was intellectual. Wow. He was intellectually explicit, but not sexually explicit the way Dorothy Day was. and politically explicit the way Dorothy Day was. I mean, it was like
I just googled if they knew each other, and they had 30 letters together.
Yeah, they did, and
that's cool.
I've read you that Merton's letter to Dorothy Day. I think it's in that podcast.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Where he said, "You found me out." I was a fraud. I described.
Yeah, that was them two talking. I forgot.
Yeah.
That was so cool.
And he confessed to her, and a lot of people thought that he was a little overly abnegating to her, which could be, but I think it was more of a indication of how much he respected her and the sacrifices that she made, that he was drawn to that kind of a confession to her. And who better to cry on their shoulder than Dorothy Day, who'd been through her own kind of hells. And so
they both together have a very united witness about war and violence.
Yeah
Along with Martin Luther King Jr., which is coming up too.
Oh yeah, and there is another,
and Wendell Berry. I mean, he talks about it too. Thank you for listening to the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast. I hope today's conversation stirred something in you, whether you're a skeptic, a believer, or someone on a deconstruction journey. Come with us as we keep exploring what it means to seek meaning in a dehumanizing age, guided by prophetic voices who wrestled with faith and doubt, paradox and nihilism. Because a prophetic imagination rarely speaks from the places we expect. It doesn't stay locked up in pulpits or seminaries. It breaks through in novels and poetry, charity, and art, through the strange and the quiet and the overlooked margins of culture. Thank you for listening. If you love our podcast or find it meaningful, here are some ways you can connect and share. Please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, leave a 5-star review, and share with anyone who might resonate. Please follow us on Instagram at Subversive Orthodoxy.
Spiritually, I wanna jump off a cliff without a parachute, like I'm high on cannabis, and skip through fields naked, like I wonder if I could drift.
This has been a Subversive Orthodoxy podcast with Travis Mullen and Professor Inchausti.
Forgetting the world's lies, meanwhile I'm fine. Looking through a stained glass oceanic scene. Say hi to human beings with a smile unseen. Grabbing wildflowers as I slide downhill.